it's bad enough to have to deal with a bigot, but when you got a dumb bigot.
Remembering Milwaukee's civil rights protest.
Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, Jericho,
and an interview with Adrienne Danrich.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of Black Nouveau. I'm Milton, Dockery.
And I'm Faithe. We're glad you could join us. On this edition, in our Finding Work segment, we'll discuss ways to re-energize southeastern Wisconsin's urban areas.
We'll remember Milwaukee's civil rights protest for open housing and meet the editor of Lip Gloss.
But first, this month, MPTV is airing This Little Light of Mine, the stories of Marian Anderson and Leontine Price. Black Nouveau spoke with the creator, writer, and star of the special, Adrienne Danrich.
They were both world-famous singers who sang classical music and opera. These ladies became famous not only for how beautifully they sang, but also for the racial barriers they helped to destroy.
This Little Light of Mine is a show that I wrote under commission by Cincinnati Opera, and they came to me with an idea of write a show about Marian Anderson and Leontine Price, and I presented them with 3 options of how I could present the show, and one of them was a multimedia performance, which is what you see today. And I chose that format because people learn in different ways. You know, some people like you to talk to them, some people like to read it, and some people like to have things demonstrated. So I figured that a multimedia presentation would be absolutely perfect for what I was trying to achieve. And the show was actually written for young adults. And I found that it has no age limit, no bounds. I've performed it for 5-year-olds and 93-year-olds, so the show has great legs, as they say.
Now, it's true that Marian was born and raised in a neighborhood in Philadelphia that was racially mixed. Black and white people went to the same schools. They learned sitting side by side. Here's Marian in her graduating class picture. But although the students were racially mixed, there were no black teachers allowed to teach at these same schools.
Well, my background as a kid, I grew up singing in my dad's funk band. I made my stage debut when I was 8 years old, and I sang Aretha Franklin's Natural Woman. And from that, actually I got accepted into a performing arts high school. And of course, you had to learn so many things, languages, solfege, how to play the piano. And I started to love the classical music. My first song that I ever learned was Virgin tutto amor, which Virgin, full of love, talking about the Virgin Mary in Italian. And I was just like so fascinated by this music, and it was easy to sing, easier than pop music. And here I am.
Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down.
Spirituals and classical music go together hand in hand. If you have an ability to sing, you want to sing songs that touch your soul. And spirituals, to me, are simply an extension of the joy that I feel when I sing classical music. And so many classically trained composers compose spirituals. So of course, you know, you have, if I was singing a spiritual at church, you would have a short range, you know, like maybe 5 notes. Well, the classical composers have listened to these songs and they go, wow, I could like put this note in and that note in, I can vary it in this kind of way. So some of the songs that, at least in this show that I've chosen to put on, have to be sung with a little bit of classical edge to them, just simply because of how the composers have written them.
To the walls of Jericho, they marched with the spear in hand. Go below them, ramparts, Joshua cried, 'cause the battle am in my hand. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down.
Joshua at the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua at the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down.
This Little Light of Mine will air on Sunday, February 20th at 3 p.m. on Channel 36.1.
In an earlier interview, Marc Levine and I talked about Martin Luther King's vision for economic equality as well as freedom. After the initial interview, we taped a discussion around what steps needed to be taken to help Milwaukee and Racine overcome their economic challenges. Here's that interview. And we're now joined by Dr. Marc Levine, founding director of the City for Economic Development at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Dr. Levine, welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Levine, let's talk about redeveloping America's inner cities. How can we do that, sir?
Well, it's a big question, and it's one that I think has bedeviled policymakers for a generation. And we've had a series of programs starting in the 1960s from model cities, and then we've had community development action grant programs. We've had enterprise zones, empowerment zones. We've had all sorts of variations of policies, and none of them has seemed to make a huge difference. And I would argue that one of the reasons that's the case is that we haven't put the resources necessary into an affirmative government public response, public investment response to the problems of particularly the inner cities of the United States. I think we've viewed inner cities as outside the economic mainstream, incapable of being brought into the economic mainstream, and we haven't made these investments in the name either of deficit reduction or whatever. We've just not made those sorts of investments. So I think the primary thing that we need to do to really redevelop inner cities is to have something along the lines of a New Deal public investment program in which we have public job creation, something like the WPA, which existed in the New Deal, or the Public Works Administration, which was a series of infrastructure projects that would rebuild parts of the inner city and indeed parts of all of Milwaukee. I think we need to improve our job training programs. I think we need to have better linkages between inner city areas and suburban areas where a lot of the job creation is occurring. That means a state-of-the-art regional rail transit system. I think we need to do some innovative things with our public schools and turn them into sort of community school centers, which can be, as we've seen in other cities, the real bulwark for economic development. So I think there are a packet of policies that we could pursue, and we've only really begun to scratch the surface in some of these, and in some ways gone the wrong direction.
You are so correct that many don't look at the inner cities as a part of the economic mainstream. For an example, if you try to invite certain developers into an urban area, oftentimes they don't come because they don't see the potential for buying power there. Right. Because they look at it in a traditional role the way you may look at the suburbs. Right. Well, in an urban area, you have to look at the combined buying power. How do we shift that view to get inner cities as a part of the economic mainstream?
Right. Well, I would slightly disagree with that in the sense that there is a lot of purchasing power in the inner city, and I think increasingly retailers are beginning to understand that, and you are getting some retail development. But I think it's sometimes a mistake to look at the combined buying power because individuals don't purchase in combined ways. Yeah. I mean, you know, Prince Fielder and I have a combined income of a little bit over $15 million, but he has $15 million and I have about less than that. So we're going to be purchasing at very different levels and purchasing very different things. So if it were just simply combined purchasing power, you know, some of the poorest cities in the world would be rapidly developing. I mean, you look at third world cities, which have incredible density, but incredible poverty. And so if you total up everybody's income, it might actually look fairly impressive, but individuals purchase either as individuals or as household units. And so what we need to do basically is not just sort of look at the aggregate income in the community, but to find ways to boost individual income or family income. And that means jobs, and it means family supporting jobs, and that's really what we need to be bringing to inner city areas. And as I said earlier, I think it's given the way in which the mainstream economy has been functioning, given the disinvestment that's been occurring in inner city areas, the only way we can, I think, counteract that is with some direct public investment that will invigorate the central city economy and create jobs.
What can people do in the central city themselves to usher in that economic development?
Well, I think people need to be as prepared as they can for the labor market. So that means availing oneself of training programs that are available, obviously connecting to various networks that will give information about where those jobs may be occurring. Obviously, keeping skills up to date is important. Learning soft skills as well as soft skills meaning getting to work on time and what the workplace environment is all about, how to do an interview. All of those sorts of things I think are very important. And then, of course, basic educational levels. I mean, it's sort of a truism that the more you learn, the more you earn. And that means staying in school. It means increasing obviously the number of college graduates if we certainly can in the community. So I think on an individual basis, education and training are very important. Unfortunately, because our economy isn't generating enough jobs, that's not sufficient. So somebody can go and get all the training they can, but if the jobs aren't there, if the jobs aren't available, they're simply not going to get the employment. So we need a multi-pronged strategy that not only has individuals getting the skills as highly developed as they can and getting as prepared as they can for the workplace, but at the same time we need a job creation strategy that is going to bring jobs to the areas of the city where people are obviously in desperate need of them.
Do you think that strategy will happen? If so, when?
Well, I have to say I was a lot more optimistic when the Obama administration came in than I am now. I mean, I thought there would clearly be a New Deal style job creation program, and I thought the stimulus package would have more of that. The stimulus package certainly had a positive effect, keeping us from falling further than we actually did. But I must say at this point, certainly at the state government level, we're entering into a very conservative, non-interventionist era. And at the federal level, I don't see much happening in the next couple of years with divided government and with the seeming more conservatism of the Obama administration. I'd like to be more optimistic, but I can't be at this point.
Dr. Levine, thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much.
During the 1950s and 60s, much of the civil rights struggle occurred in America's southern states, but northern urban areas went through their own crises as well.
Here in Milwaukee, the battle for open housing became a national story, with some labeling the city the Selma of the North as a march across the 16th Street Viaduct turned violent.
That bridge is now named after Father James Groppe, one of the leaders of those protests and an advisor to the NAACP Youth Council.
Richard Green was a member of the NAACP Youth Council and remembers that protest for us.
Well, Milwaukee, in terms of the housing, has always been segregated. It is, it most certainly is still segregated right now. But we're talking about 40 years ago, whereas there were strictly certain parts of towns where people of color could live and could not live. Val Phillips wanted to introduce a bill whereas people could live wherever they could afford to live or wherever they wanted to live.
I did try to, as I said, to appeal to a sense of justice, but it's quite apparent to me that the members of this honorable body, to put it in the terms of my commando friends, these cats are just too dumb, to know when they have something going for them. You know, things it's bad enough to have to deal with a bigot, but when you got a dumb bigot,
I lived in Milwaukee all my life, and my parents did, and we never thought about moving next to, let's say, moving to the South Side. But once whites assumed that blacks were going to move to the side, all that racism and hatred and bigotry just totally came out, and I just could not understand that. It was just mind-boggling to me and to many of the other people. And so that was one of the reasons the demonstrations kept going, because we wanted to show, the world how racist and how deep down hatred existed in this town.
We have tried every means possible to bring fair housing legislation to the city of Milwaukee, and we're going to continue to march. It's up to the government of this city and of this state to see to it that we can exercise our constitutional right of freedom of speech, and we're going to exercise that regardless of what the danger. We'll die for that right.
I worked with a lot of white people at that time, and just to march across the viaduct and, as some of the things go on. And some of the people, fortunately, that I work with were actually selling bricks for a nickel to throw at the demonstrators. And if that doesn't leave a certain degree of scars and wounds, then, something's wrong with you. And when I saw that, then, it changed my whole philosophy about a lot of people. And I've never been able to totally get rid of it.
What I can't understand is, where is the leadership in the white community? Now, you had a program on television here about a week and a half ago entitled, Where is the Negro Leader? Or Who is the Negro Leader? Well, for heaven's sake, apparently there isn't any leadership in the white community, because those people are going to church every Sunday, and I can't understand how they can go to church where they're supposed to be learning the doctrine of Jesus Christ, which is love and brotherhood, and then come out there and call people niggers and black bastards, and wave that Confederate flag and chant, "We want slaves," and everything else.
Once they realized there was an injustice, many, many whites got involved in the movement, and most certainly they were terribly, terribly helpful. They went to jail, they got beat, just like we did, and it was just a moral victory for, all of us at that time to see, a lot of whites become involved in the movement. National exposure, some of the boycotting, and most certainly the demonstrations, changed the minds of many of the aldermen, and at a later stage, they all voted for the ordinance to, for the open housing ordinance. So that changed the city in terms of where people could essentially live.
The Selma of the North is also the title of a book that chronicles Milwaukee's civil rights insurgencies. Patrick Jones, the book's author, was in town recently to talk about the protests. Everett Marshburn has more.
This was the scene the first Saturday in February as the St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church celebrated African American History Month with a dialogue between civil rights activists Father Matthew Gottschalk and Patrick Jones, author of The Selma of the North.
Selma of the North is a term that some journalists began to use on Milwaukee. Labeled Milwaukee the Selma of the North, following the initial marches across the 16th Street Viaduct when peaceful protesters marched into the primarily white ethnic working class side of town and faced incredible opposition, including racist chants and signs. They had things thrown at them, rocks, bricks, sticks, even human urine and feces, things like that, people holding white power signs. And then they were also attacked, and the media was there and covered it, and that became national news. And that was just a short time after, a couple of years after the Selma voting rights protests in 1965 and the beating that peaceful protesters took on, at the edge of the Edmund Pettus Bridge there. And so that image resonated, and people felt like this looks a lot like Selma. And interestingly, like Selma, Alabama, which led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the open housing campaign here and the national attention that it attracted helped spur passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, or otherwise known as the Fair Housing Act.
Many topics were discussed during the 3-hour session, including the Catholic Church's role in the civil rights struggle and the importance of individual citizens as well.
In general, the popular narrative of the civil rights movement has long been about national leaders, significant individuals, Dr. King, Malcolm X, presidents and congressmen, Kennedy or Johnson, right? A kind of top-down history. And this gets the story wrong, that in fact those folks often acted out of the pressure placed on them by the social movement that we call the civil rights movement or the African American freedom movement. Ella Baker, one of the great and largely still unknown civil rights leaders and really great figures of 20th century American history, used to say, you know, Martin didn't make the movement made Martin. That, you know, a leader without people around to support him or her is not very powerful and can't get a whole lot done. In recent years, we've seen that local struggle and local people have been the engine for change, not just at the local level, but at the national level when it came to the civil rights era. And that's true in Milwaukee as well, that thousands of ordinary people, from people who lived in the inner city to people who lived in the suburbs, came and participated in this movement. And it was that outpouring of support, that collective action, that organized action among the citizenry, and really people from across the country ended up coming in to Milwaukee as well.
Lip Gloss is a new magazine developed for ethnic teen girls to help them love and respect their bodies and be true to their desires and aspirations. Dolores Brown is the executive editor of the magazine and joins us now. Welcome, Dolores.
Thank you.
Let me ask you this.
Okay.
What motivated you to start a teen magazine for girls?
I actually worked in arts and education and also ran an after-school program at a middle school in a very tough neighborhood in Queens. I'm from New York. And my girls, I had these girls in the 4th grade who were wearing tight clothing. I had 8th graders who were brilliant, but their goal was to be a video model or to marry a baller, and they would sit around and flirt with the boys, and they didn't really care about things. They had a very get money mentality, if that means anything. And it was just one of those things where it broke my heart, and I tried talking with the girls and reaching out to their parents, and there was a lot of resistance. And so I said, in this way, I'm not able to reach out, but I have a background in fashion and a background in photography. So I decided maybe a magazine, let me look out and see what's out there. And so I subscribed to every teen magazine that comes to the United States of America for about a year, and there was nothing out there speaking to the girls that were in my population. The young black girls, young Spanish girls in the city, there was nothing where they could pick it up that had a positive message and also had images of them inside of it. So I said, I have the skill set and I have the network to start working towards that. I'm going to see if I can do that and be a positive source of media information for them.
So of all of this and developing the girls and really wanting to speak to them, how did you come up with the title of the magazine, Lip Gloss?
The title of the magazine, we tried to think of something that's fun, something that's young, something that every girl would relate to, and something that would make them want to pick it up. Because when you look at an educational magazine or a lot of the positive magazines, they have very stiff, sterile titles, not something that a 13-year-old, 14-year-old girl is necessarily going to go in and grab off of a newsstand. We wanted something that popped out, something that still was a little innocent but still fun and fresh. It's right that borderline to womanhood. You know, you hit 13, your mom says, okay, you can wear a little lip gloss. So that's kind of, you hit that age, you're starting to grow up and become a young woman, you can have a little lip gloss.
And that's a demographic that you're really aiming towards,
yes.
Ages 12, 13, 14 years old.
13 to 16 is our primary demographic, extended on to 19, but right now we're focusing on the younger girls just to pull them in, and then as they grow up, the lip gloss will grow up with them.
And have you been able to get any of your stories from the girls that you taught? And I mean, is that where you pull your stories from?
Some of it, yes. My very first issue on the cover of that magazine is a girl that I mentored who was going in, she had just graduated high school and she decided to go into the Air Force. And the whole thing is just about her deciding that she wasn't going to be another statistic. She said, I don't want to be another, you know, teen, like pregnant Spanish girl in the Bronx, is what she told me. She said, so I don't have the money to go to college right now. I'm going to join the Air Force. we put her on the cover, she told her story, and we had a ton of people write in saying, hey, I really relate, I'm trying to get out of my neighborhood, I'm trying to do something positive, and my mom didn't understand why the service would be a choice I'd make. So
let's talk about some future stories that you're thinking about publishing.
We have, in upcoming issues, we have some Special Olympians that are going to be competing in the World Games. We have a whole focus coming in about the bone marrow. Like basically, there are African Americans, Hispanic, girls of color that are dying from leukemia and other things because there's such a small percentage of the bone marrow bank that comes from our communities. So we're starting up a whole outreach and drives to get teenagers to start having.
Teenagers become more socially,
socially
aware of what's going on besides just being a teen and the things that usually interest teens. So they can become interested in some, health issues and political issues.
In political issues, in educational issues. We try to mix everything in. The main goal of Lip Gloss is to encourage our readers to step out of the box and to try something new. So everything that we put into an issue is going towards giving them a new angle, a new look at something that they can be doing that maybe they didn't think girls like them did.
And the stories that are in the magazine, will you find those same stories on your website?
Yes, you can find the whole magazine on our website.
And what is your website?
It's www.lipglossmagazine.com. That's LIPGLOSSMAGAZINE.com.
Thank you so much, Dolores, for joining us on Black Nouveau.
Thank you.
And that wraps up this edition of Black Nouveau.
Remember, in the coming week, do something to expand your world. Good night.
Good night, and thanks for watching.